Have you ever walked into a place and felt like the walls themselves were watching you? Mobile, Alabama is full of history, but some of its buildings, streets, and cemeteries carry more than just memories. On my journey through the city, I felt cold spots, heard whispers, and experienced moments that made my heart race. These aren't just stories, they're real encounters, from old mansions to shadowed graveyards. Join me as we explore the top 15 haunted places in Mobile, where the past refuses to stay silent. If you're enjoying these chilling stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Spooky Stories for more real paranormal adventures. 1. Malaga Inn. I still remember the first night I stayed at the Malaga Inn in Mobile. I didn't come looking for ghosts. I booked the room because the building was old, beautiful, and close to downtown. I like historic places. They feel alive in a quiet way. When I checked in, the front desk staff smiled normally, but one of them casually said, "If anything strange happens, just let us know." She said it like it was nothing. I laughed it off, but that sentence stayed in my head. My room was on the upper floor, facing the courtyard. The air felt cooler than outside, even though it was summer. The hallway was silent, the kind of silence where you can hear your own footsteps too clearly. When I unlocked my door, I felt a strange pause in my chest, like my body hesitated before stepping inside. I told myself it was just travel tiredness. Later that night, I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone when I heard soft footsteps above me. Slow, careful. I assumed it was another guest, but the sound didn't move away. It just stayed there, pacing. Then it stopped. Right after that, I heard what sounded like a child quietly crying. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was soft, like someone trying not to be heard. That's what made it worse. I sat up, my heart beating faster than it should. The hallway outside was empty when I opened the door. No voices, no movement. Only the old wood smell and that same heavy quiet. I went back inside and locked the door, telling myself old buildings make noises, but deep down, I knew this felt different. Around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly, like someone had shaken me. The room felt colder. I was fully awake. That's when I saw it. The bathroom door, which I clearly remembered closing, was now slightly open, just enough to notice. I didn't see a figure, I didn't hear a voice, but I felt watched. Not threatened, just noticed. The next morning, I didn't mention anything until the front desk clerk asked how my night was. When I hesitated, she nodded slowly and said, "The child again?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That moment stayed with me more than anything else. I left the Malaga Inn with no proof, no photos, no recordings, just a memory that feels heavier than a story. Whatever lives in that building doesn't try to scare you. It just lets you know you're not alone. 2. USS Alabama Battleship Memorial Park. I visited the USS Alabama Battleship Memorial Park on a clear afternoon, thinking it would be a normal historical visit. I had seen warships before, but standing next to this one felt different. The ship was massive, silent, and heavy, like it was carrying more than just steel and history. As I stepped onto the deck, I remember thinking how strange it was that a place once filled with thousands of sailors now felt so empty. I walked slowly through the corridors, reading plaques, touching the cold metal walls. The air inside was thick and warm, even though outside there was a breeze. It smelled like old oil and rust. Every sound echoed, my shoes, my breathing, even the small movements of my clothes. I told myself this was normal for a ship, but I still felt uneasy, like I was being followed at a distance. At one point, I stopped near the sleeping quarters. The bunks were stacked tightly, barely enough room to move. I tried to imagine young sailors sleeping there during wartime, not knowing if they would see another day. That thought hit me hard. While standing there, I heard a single clear footstep behind me. I turned immediately, expecting to see another visitor. No one was there. The hallway was empty in both directions. I brushed it off and kept walking, but the feeling didn't leave. Later, inside one of the darker sections below deck, I felt a sudden cold spot. It was sharp and sudden, like stepping into air-conditioned space, but there were no vents nearby. My arms broke out in goosebumps. I stood still, listening. That's when I heard a low voice, not loud, not clear, just enough to sound human. It felt like someone whispering, but I couldn't understand the words. My heart started racing. I didn't run, but I walked faster toward the exit. When I finally stepped back into daylight, I felt relief wash over me, like I had been holding my breath without realizing it. Before leaving, I spoke casually with a staff member and asked if people ever report strange experiences. He looked at me for a second, then nodded and said, "More than you'd think, especially former sailors' areas." He didn't smile when he said it. I left the USS Alabama with respect, not fear. Whatever people experience there doesn't feel like a story made up for tourists. It feels like echoes, memories that never fully left the ship. 3. Church Street Graveyard. I first visited Church Street Graveyard on a cloudy evening just before sunset. The iron gate squeaked as I pushed it open, and the smell of damp earth hit me immediately. I had been reading about this place for weeks, but walking through it felt completely different. The gravestones were old, many tilted or cracked, some dating back to the early 1800s. I felt like I had stepped into another time. As I walked along the narrow stone paths, I noticed how quiet it was. No birds, no wind in the trees, just the soft crunch of my shoes on gravel. Every now and then, I would stop and read an inscription, imagining the people buried there and the lives they lived. Something about being so close to history made me feel both small and uneasy at the same time. After a while, I reached a section with very old graves, almost completely worn down by time. That's when I felt it, the first cold spot. It wasn't just a breeze. It wrapped around me like someone had walked past me very close, leaving a shadow of chill behind. I looked around, but there was no one, just the gravestones and the low clouds gathering above. I continued walking, trying to shake off the feeling, but the hairs on my arms stood up every few steps. Then I heard it, a soft whisper just behind me. I froze, my heart racing. It wasn't a word I could understand, but it sounded human, like someone was trying to speak without being heard. I slowly turned, expecting to see another visitor or even a trick of the wind. Nothing, just the gravestones, leaning and silent. I decided to sit on a nearby bench to calm myself. As I sat there, I noticed shadows moving oddly in the corner of my eyes, but when I looked directly, they weren't there. I felt eyes on me, like the history of the place was alive and watching. I tried to remind myself that this was an old graveyard and our minds play tricks, but the feeling wouldn't leave. Before leaving, I whispered a small apology to anyone who might still linger there, thanking them for letting me walk among them. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched across the graves. I left Church Street Graveyard with no photos or evidence, just the memory of being watched, feeling the past brush against me, and knowing this place held stories far older and deeper than I could ever imagine. 4. Old Shell Road Church Steeple, former Old Shell Road Church, Mobile. I remember the first time I visited the Old Shell Road Church steeple in Mobile. It was late afternoon, and the sun was already starting to dip behind the trees lining the road. The building itself was quiet, almost abandoned looking, but there was something about it that drew me closer, like it was waiting for someone to notice. I parked my car and stepped onto the cracked pavement, the air feeling heavier than usual. As I walked toward the steeple, I could hear the faint creaking of the wooden beams above. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then the creaking seemed to move with me, echoing in a rhythm that didn't match the breeze. My heart picked up, and I paused to listen. The church lot was empty, except for a few overgrown weeds and the distant hum of traffic. Yet the sound felt alive, as if someone or something was pacing above me. Inside the small building, the smell of old wood and damp stone hit me. I ran my hand along the pews, dusty and rough, imagining the people who once sat here in prayer. The space was still and quiet, but I kept feeling small taps at my shoulder, though no one was there. I laughed nervously to myself, thinking my imagination was running wild, but deep down I knew it wasn't just my mind. I moved toward the base of the steeple, looking up at its towering height. That's when I saw a shadow cross the narrow window at the top. It was quick, barely a flicker, but it was enough to make my stomach tighten. I took a step back, trying to rationalize it, maybe a bird, maybe the clouds, but my instincts screamed that it was something else. Suddenly, I heard a soft voice, almost like a whisper, saying my name. I froze. It wasn't loud, not a shout, but clear enough that I knew I hadn't imagined it. My legs felt heavy, my palms sweaty. I wanted to leave, but a strange pull kept me rooted to the spot, as if the place itself was holding me there. Eventually, I stepped out into the fading light, my breath coming fast. The street was quiet again, and the feeling of being watched slowly faded. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the sense that the old Shell Road church steeple was alive in its own way, holding the echoes of those who had been there long before me, and maybe even waiting for the next person to feel its presence. 5. Kate Shepherd House Bed and Breakfast, Mobile. I first arrived at the Kate Shepherd House Bed and Breakfast on a warm, humid evening. The sun had just set, and the street lamps flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the old brick walkway. From the outside, the house looked charming, classic Southern architecture with large windows and wraparound porches. I was excited for a quiet weekend getaway, but something about the place made the hairs on my arms stand up the moment I stepped onto the porch. The front door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old wood and lavender. A friendly woman at the desk welcomed me, but her eyes seemed to flicker toward the hallway, as if she had just seen something she didn't want to mention. I shrugged it off, telling myself I was overthinking. My room was on the second floor, with a window overlooking the garden. As I unpacked, I heard a faint giggling sound, like a child playing hide-and-seek. I paused and listened carefully. It wasn't coming from outside, and the house was quiet apart from my own movements. I told myself it must be the wind or maybe a bird, but deep down I knew it wasn't natural. Later that night, I woke up to a sudden chill. My breath hung in the air and the window curtains fluttered though the window was closed. I sat up and noticed the door to my room slowly creaking open. My heart raced as I stared, half expecting to see someone step in. No one did, but I felt it, an invisible presence watching, lingering. The next morning, during breakfast in the dining room, I casually asked the innkeeper if guests had reported strange things. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded, telling me softly that some visitors had seen a child wandering the halls or heard footsteps when no one else was around. She smiled politely, but there was an edge in her voice, as if she'd personally felt it too. By the time I left the Kate Shepherd house, I didn't have photos, recordings, or proof of anything. What I did have was a memory, an uneasy awareness that the house held stories, echoes of the past that hadn't fully left. Walking back to my car, I glanced up at the windows and felt, for just a moment, that something inside was silently watching me leave and maybe waiting for the next guest to feel it too. 6. Mobile Carnival Museum, located in the old Southern Market Building. I first walked into the Mobile Carnival Museum, located in the old Southern Market Building, on a quiet weekday afternoon. The museum was mostly empty, except for a few staff members arranging exhibits and a couple of tourists taking pictures. The building itself was impressive: high ceilings, old brick walls, and massive wooden beams that seemed to carry decades of history. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt a weight in the air, almost like the building remembered everything that had happened there. I started exploring the exhibits, looking at old Mardi Gras floats, costumes, and historical photographs. It was fascinating, but there was a strange energy that made me feel like I wasn't alone. Sometimes I thought I saw a shadow moving just past my peripheral vision, but when I turned, there was nothing. I shrugged it off, thinking it was my imagination or a trick of the light through the high windows. As I wandered deeper into the building, I entered a hallway lined with display cases. That's when I heard it. A soft whisper, almost like someone was talking behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The hallway was completely empty except for me. My heart began to race. The sound was faint but undeniably human, and it seemed to come from somewhere just out of reach. I tried to focus on the displays, but then I noticed the faint smell of old wood and something metallic like iron or old coins. It was subtle but distinct, and it made my skin prickle. I continued walking, but every step I took seemed to echo too loudly, and I could swear the shadows on the walls moved slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. By the time I reached the back of the building, near the storage area for old floats, I felt a sudden chill. I shivered and realized I hadn't felt cold before. The room was empty, silent, but I could sense someone or something watching. I didn't see a figure, but I felt a presence, lingering, as if it belonged to the history of the building itself. When I left the Mobile Carnival Museum, I couldn't stop thinking about the feeling of being followed, of unseen eyes tracking my every step. There was no evidence, no photos, no recordings, only the memory of a quiet whisper in the hall and a sense that the building itself holds stories that are still alive, waiting for visitors to notice. Condé, Mobile. I first stepped onto the grounds of Fort Condé on a bright, humid afternoon. The fort sits at the tip of downtown Mobile, surrounded by streets and modern buildings, but stepping inside felt like entering another time. The brick walls were thick and imposing, and the cannons along the ramparts seemed silently guard the history within. I had come to explore, expecting nothing more than a historical tour, but the moment I walked past the main gate, I felt a strange weight in the air, like the past was watching. As I wandered through the fort, I noticed the echo of my own footsteps on the stone floors. Every sound felt amplified, reverberating through the empty courtyards and rooms. I imagined soldiers from centuries ago pacing the same paths, preparing for battles, and suddenly the history of the place didn't feel distant, it felt alive. I reached one of the inner chambers and paused to read the plaques when I caught a movement in the corner of my eye. A shadow flickered across the wall just fast enough that when I turned, nothing was there. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Later, near the ramparts, a sudden chill swept across the courtyard. It wasn't the wind, the day was warm, but the cold wrapped around me, making my skin prickle. I shivered and looked around. The fort was empty aside from a few distant tourists, yet I felt a presence, heavy and deliberate. As I explored the tunnels beneath the fort, the air grew cooler, damper. My footsteps echoed endlessly, and I began to hear faint sounds, whispers that weren't quite words, almost like conversations just beyond comprehension. My heart raced, but I couldn't stop moving forward, drawn by some curiosity I couldn't name. At one point, I stopped and felt a tap on my shoulder. I spun around, but no one was there. By the time I climbed back up to the main courtyard, I felt both exhilarated and unsettled. The sun was setting, casting long shadows along the brick walls, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Fort Condé wasn't just a relic of history. It was a place where the past lingered, where echoes of soldiers, footsteps, and whispers still waited for someone to notice. Walking back to my car, I glanced one last time at the fort, knowing that whatever had brushed past me that day, it was part of the life of the building, alive in memory, if not in form. 8. Magnolia Cemetery, Mobile. I first visited Magnolia Cemetery on a late afternoon when the sun was low and shadows stretched long across the old gravestones. The entrance gate creaked as I pushed it open, and the air immediately felt heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I had read about the cemetery's history, but being there in person was different. Walking among the tombstones, some dating back to the early 1800s, I felt a strange mix of awe and unease. The pathways were narrow and uneven, forcing me to watch my steps carefully. I paused often, reading inscriptions and imagining the lives of the people buried here. There was a quietness that seemed alive, a stillness that wasn't empty. It felt like the cemetery itself was observing me. At one point, I heard a faint rustling behind me. I turned quickly, expecting a stray animal or the wind moving through the trees, but there was nothing. As I moved deeper into the cemetery, the shadows grew longer, and the temperature seemed to drop slightly. I felt a cold spot brush past me, not just a breeze, but a presence that seemed deliberate. My stomach tightened, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder constantly, though no one was there. Then I heard it, a soft sigh, almost human, coming from between the gravestones. My heart began to race. I tried to convince myself it was the wind or my imagination, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. At one point, I sat on an old stone bench to collect my thoughts, and I noticed the faint outline of a figure at the edge of my vision. When I looked directly, it vanished. Goosebumps prickled my arms, and I felt a shiver that wasn't from the cool air. Before leaving Magnolia Cemetery, I whispered a quiet thanks to anyone or anything watching over the grounds, acknowledging their history. Walking back to the gate, I couldn't shake the sense that the cemetery held memories far older than I could understand. I left with no proof, only the lingering sensation that the past was alive in that place, silently observing, waiting, and remembering. 9. Richards DAR House Museum, Mobile. I first visited the Richards DAR House Museum on a warm, sunny afternoon, expecting a quiet historical tour. The house stood proudly, with its white columns and neatly kept gardens, looking every bit the part of a southern mansion. But the moment I stepped onto the porch, I felt a strange heaviness in the air, like the house itself was aware of my presence. Inside, the scent of old wood and polished furniture hit me immediately. The rooms were immaculate, filled with artifacts and portraits of people from long ago. I wandered slowly, taking in the history, when I noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a chill that seemed to follow me from room to room. I told myself it was just the old air conditioning or the thick walls, but the feeling persisted. While exploring the parlor, I heard a soft sound, like footsteps on the wooden floor above me. I paused, my heart starting to race, but when I listened more carefully, the sound stopped. I climbed the stairs cautiously, expecting to find another visitor or staff member, but the upstairs was empty. My pulse quickened as the sense of being watched grew stronger.
In one of the bedrooms, I felt something brush past me, a faint touch on my shoulder, though I was completely alone. I spun around quickly, expecting to see someone, but no one was there. My stomach tightened and a chill ran down my spine. I could almost hear whispers, soft and indistinct just beyond comprehension. By the time I left the Richards Dar house, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows through the windows. I had no photos, no recordings, only the memory of a presence that felt deeply tied to the history of the house. Walking back to my car, I glanced at the mansion one last time and felt a quiet acknowledgement, as if the house knew I had been there and it remembered every step I had taken within its walls. 10. Bragg Mitchell Mansion, Mobile. I first arrived at the Bragg Mitchell Mansion on a late afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the front lawn. The house looked stunning, with its grand columns and sprawling porches, but there was something about it that made me pause. The air felt thick, almost heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. I parked my car and stepped onto the walkway, feeling a strange mix of excitement and unease. Inside, the smell of polished wood and old furniture filled my senses. The rooms were decorated beautifully with antique furnishings and portraits of people who had lived there long ago. As I walked through the hallways, I felt a subtle chill, like someone had walked past me without making a sound. I told myself it was nothing, just the old house settling, but my skin prickled anyway. While exploring the second floor, I heard a faint creaking behind me, like footsteps moving slowly along the hallway. I froze, listening carefully, but when I turned around, there was no one there. The house was silent except for the echo of my own movements. A few moments later, I noticed a shadow flicker near the corner of one room, but when I looked directly, it vanished. In the parlor, I felt a light touch on my arm, barely to notice, but it was enough to make my heart race. I spun around quickly, expecting to see another visitor or a staff member, but the room was empty. Goosebumps ran down my arms, and the air felt colder than it should have. I could sense a presence, not threatening, but aware of me, watching quietly. By the time I left the Bragg Mitchell mansion, the sun was almost gone, leaving the house bathed in a soft, fading light. I didn't have any photos or recordings, just the memory of the house itself feeling alive, holding its history tightly and letting me know that the past there was not entirely gone. Walking back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion had silently acknowledged my visit, keeping a quiet watch as I drove away. 11. Oakley Historic Complex, Mobile. I first visited the Oakley Historic Complex on a bright, warm afternoon, expecting a peaceful walk through history. The mansion and surrounding gardens looked perfect in the sunlight, but as soon as I stepped through the front gate, I felt a strange heaviness in the air, almost like the house was silently observing me. The smell of old wood and blooming flowers mingled, creating an oddly comforting but unsettling atmosphere. Inside the mansion, the floors creaked softly under my footsteps. The rooms were beautifully preserved, filled with antique furniture, paintings, and delicate decor from centuries past. As I wandered from room to room, I noticed subtle changes in temperature, cool spots that appeared suddenly, especially near the corners of certain rooms. I brushed it off as drafts, but my instincts told me it was more than that. While exploring the upstairs bedrooms, I heard soft footsteps behind me. I stopped abruptly and turned, expecting to see a staff member or another visitor. There was no one there. The hallway was empty, and yet the sound had been so clear, so deliberate. My heart started racing, and I could feel my palms grow slightly sweaty. In one of the sitting rooms, I felt a sudden pressure near my shoulder, as if someone had gently leaned close to me. I turned quickly, but there was no one in sight. A whisper seemed to brush against my ear, though I couldn't make out words. Goosebumps rose along my arms, and the quiet of the house felt deeper, almost aware of my presence. By the time I left Oakley Historic Complex, the sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the garden. I had no photos or recordings, only the vivid memory of the mansion and its subtle, watchful presence. Walking back to my car, I felt a quiet respect for the house, knowing that the history within its walls was alive in its own way, quietly observing every step I had taken. 12. Sanger Theater, Mobile. I first went to the Sanger Theater on a Friday evening, hoping to catch a local performance. The marquee lights glowed warmly against the darkening sky, but as soon as I stepped inside, the air felt heavier, charged in a way I couldn't explain. The ornate architecture and velvet seats were stunning, yet there was a quiet tension, as if the theater remembered every show and every person who had walked its halls. I walked through the lobby, my footsteps echoing on the polished floors. I glanced up at the chandeliers and the intricate moldings, imagining the performers who had stood on the stage decades ago. It was awe-inspiring, but the deeper I went into the theater, the more I felt watched. Shadows seemed to move at the edge of my vision, and I caught myself looking over my shoulder repeatedly.
When I reached the stage, empty at the time, I heard the faint sound of piano keys being pressed. I froze, expecting a staff member, but the stage was empty. The sound stopped as suddenly as it began. My heart raced. I told myself it was the old building settling, or maybe a rehearsal somewhere I couldn't see, but the feeling of unease stayed with me. As I explored the backstage area, the air grew colder, and I felt a pressure near my shoulder, like someone had leaned close to whisper in my ear. I spun around, but no one was there. Then I heard faint applause, soft, almost distant, like an echo of a performance long ago. I could feel the energy of the theater's past, almost as if it was alive, replaying moments over and over for anyone sensitive enough to notice. By the time I left the Sanger Theater, the lights outside felt too bright, almost harsh compared to the charged darkness inside. I had no photos, no recordings, only the memory of a theater alive with unseen energy, where every creak, every whisper, and every shadow seemed to carry a story from the past. Walking to my car, I felt a strange mixture of awe and unease, knowing that the Sangers' history isn't just in books or plaques, it lingers quietly for anyone willing to feel it. 13. The Battle House Renaissance Hotel, Mobile. I first stayed at the Battle House Renaissance Hotel on a chilly evening in late fall. From the outside, the hotel looked elegant and welcoming, its historic architecture shining under the streetlights. I had booked a room for a short weekend trip, expecting comfort and quiet, but as soon as I stepped into the lobby, I felt a subtle weight in the air, like the building itself was aware of my presence. The lobby was beautifully decorated with polished marble and ornate furnishings, but there was an almost imperceptible chill that ran along my spine as I walked toward the elevators. The staff greeted me warmly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was quietly watching from the corners of the grand hall. My room was on the top floor, overlooking the city streets. As I unpacked, I heard soft creaking sounds outside my door, like footsteps pacing slowly. I paused, my heart beating faster, and opened the door slightly to check the hallway. It was empty. No one was there, but the sensation of being observed remained. Later that night, I woke suddenly around 2 a.m. The room was cold, and the shadows cast by the streetlights outside danced across the walls. I thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye, a fleeting figure near the window, but when I turned fully, nothing was there. Then came the faint sound of whispers, just enough to feel human, but impossible to understand. I stayed in bed, heart racing, telling myself it was the hotel settling or my imagination, but I knew it was more. By morning, the eerie feeling hadn't completely left. During checkout, I casually mentioned my experience to the front desk clerk, who simply nodded and smiled knowingly. "Some guests feel it," she said quietly. "The hotel has been around a long time." I didn't ask for more. I left the Battle House with no proof, only a vivid memory of a historic building alive with echoes from the past, quietly observing anyone who steps inside, waiting to remind them that history never truly fades. 14. Mobile Infirmary Medical Center, Paranormal Claims, Mobile. I never planned to spend the night inside Mobile Infirmary Medical Center. I was there because a close family member had been admitted unexpectedly. Hospitals already carry heavy emotions, and this one felt different from the moment I walked in. The hallways were bright, but strangely quiet, especially late at night. Even with nurses moving around, there was a silence underneath everything, like the building was holding decades of stories in its walls. Around midnight, things slowed down. The machines hummed softly, and the lights in the hallway were dimmed. I sat in the chair near the room, scrolling on my phone, trying to stay awake. That's when I noticed the temperature change. One moment it was normal, and the next it felt cold, like someone had opened a door to the outside.
I looked around, expecting to see a nurse or a cart. Nothing. A little later, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, careful. I looked up, thinking it was staff doing rounds, but the hallway was empty. The footsteps didn't fade away, they just stopped right outside the door. My chest tightened. I remember holding my breath without realizing it. After a few seconds, the sound was gone. What stayed with me most was the feeling. It wasn't fear exactly. It felt like presence, like someone standing nearby, not wanting attention, just there. At one point, I smelled something faint, like old antiseptic mixed with something metallic. It reminded me that this place had seen loss, recovery, and final moments for generations. Around 3 a.m., I felt someone lightly touch my arm. It was gentle, like a reassuring tap. I turned instantly, expecting a nurse. No one was there. I stood up, my heart racing, scanning the hallway again. Still empty. I sat back down slowly, trying to make sense of it, but deep down I knew it didn't feel imagined.
The next morning, when a nurse came in, I casually asked if people ever report strange experiences at night. She paused, then quietly said, "You'd be surprised how often." She didn't laugh. She didn't sound dramatic, just honest. I left Mobile Infirmary exhausted, emotionally and physically. I don't claim I saw a ghost. I don't have proof, but I know what I felt. Some places don't just treat the living, they remember everyone who ever passed through. And sometimes, late at night, you can feel that memory watching you breathe. Alabama Cruise Terminal, former State Docks area, Mobile. I first visited the Alabama Cruise Terminal, the former State Docks area in Mobile, on a quiet evening just after dusk. The docks were mostly empty, the large warehouses casting long shadows across the cracked concrete. The salty scent of the water mixed with rust and old wood filled the air. I had come to explore the area out of curiosity, knowing it had a long history, but I wasn't prepared for the feeling that hit me the moment I stepped onto the pier. As I walked along the edge of the docks, I could hear the faint lapping of water against the pilings. Every sound I made seemed amplified in the stillness. I glanced at the warehouses, their windows dark and broken in places, and imagined the sailors, dock workers, and travelers who had passed through this spot over the decades. It was easy to picture the bustle of the past, but the emptiness of the present made the atmosphere heavy, almost tense. While exploring the terminal building, I felt a sudden chill sweep across the room. The air was still, but it felt like someone had walked past me very close. I spun around quickly, expecting a security guard or worker, but the space was empty. My heart raced, and I could feel the hairs on my arms stand up. Then I heard faint voices, soft, unintelligible, almost like whispers carried on the wind. They weren't words I could understand, just the sound of someone trying to speak from far away. I moved cautiously along the docks, my footsteps echoing on the concrete. At one point, I felt a light tap on my shoulder, almost imperceptible, but enough to make me spin around. Nothing was there. The silence returned, heavy and thick, but the sense of being watched lingered. By the time I left the Alabama Cruise Terminal, the streetlights reflected on the water, and the shadows of the warehouses stretched long behind me. I had no photos, no recordings, just a memory. A memory of a place alive with echoes, of sailors, workers, and travelers long gone, and of a presence that quietly lingers, observing anyone who dares to walk the empty docks after dark. As my journey through Mobile's haunted locations comes to an end, I can't help but feel the weight of history and the echoes of those who once walked these streets and halls. Each place holds its own story, silent witnesses, lingering presences, and whispers of the past that refuse to fade. From eerie cemeteries to historic mansions and quiet docks, the experiences remind us that history isn't just in books, it lives around us, sometimes watching, sometimes whispering. Thank you for joining me on this journey.
Remember, these stories are real, and the past is never truly gone.